Rags to riches. The 2023 Fantasy Major League Rugby champion has been crowned. And wait till you hear the long journey of this year's winner and how it all started with a poop emoji. Take a look back at the championship fantasy matchups, this past weekend's round 17 MLR games and top performers, and a reflection of the 2023 Fantasy Major League Rugby season. The Fantasy Ruckers show starts right now.
Where rugby and the world of fantasy sports collide. Welcome to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, talking all things rugby from the MLR to leagues around the world. We're on top of it. Headphones on, pads off. This is the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Now, here are your hosts, Ryan Yee, Matt Yee, and Devin Vanderpool.
What's up, everybody? This is episode number 70 of the Fantasy Ruckers Show.
I'm going to Disney World.
Thank you so much to the Fantasy Ruckers league members, the community members, and everyone else tagging along on this journey of trying to make fantasy rugby a reality in the MLR. And if you couldn't tell right off the top of the show there, this one's a little bit of a different one here. Thank you for joining us. I'm Ryan Yee. Of course, with me, Matt Yee, Devin Vanderpool. It is the end of the 2023 Fantasy Major League Rugby Championship, and as you can tell, we have ourselves a champion.
Oh, you gotta
I'm going
be
to Disney
kidding
World.
me.
I'm going to Disney World. I said it at the top of the show. Talk about a rags to riches story, and we're going to get into it throughout the, I'm sure, the entirety of this episode. You're not, if you're a league member, you're definitely not going to hear the end of it. If you've been following along, you're going to get a whole spoonful of definitely not humble pie, the opposite of that. But Maddie, you are the 2023 Fantasy Major League Rugby champion. A tough one. Obviously, we had your opponents.
To you, buddy.
Yeah.
There you go. Cracking open a beer for the champion. We had Fitzy on, obviously, last week of Rugby Morning, John Fitzpatrick. It was a highly touted bout heading into the weekend.
Tough one,
Matt,
Fitz.
you got the best of it.
Buddy.
You finished first in the regular season. You grinded through the playoffs, and here you are wearing the Mickey Mouse hat, going to Disney World. You're the champion.
I'm going to Disney World. I don't even know. I didn't think of what I was going to say after that because I was too excited about going to Disney World. But no, it was a great season. You know, nobody saw it coming.
I'm sick to my
bottom,
stomach.
him at the top. Vandy's loving it. Vandy's been telling me all season. He's like, I can't wait to see you win. And you know what? It was a good matchup against Fitzy.
You know what?
I
I
had to find. I told him I would tell him this time next week or last week. I told him that this time I'd be telling him rugby good night, and he's sleeping. That's for sure.
Oh,
you did say you did. Matt, Vandy, you did miss that last week. Matt closed out the show saying it's going to be rugby good morning, rugby good afternoon, and rugby good night. And that's how we closed out. And Matt followed through. And
that's a banger line, buddy.
We're gonna break it all down here. We're gonna go through all the matchups. We're gonna go through obviously the top performers that got us to that point. Got Matt the second ever fantasy championship. He's going to get his name behind me on the Fantasy Ruckers
right on top of
jersey. And we're going to get into obviously the $100 donation that will be going to the charity of Matthew's choice as well. But we'll break it all down. We'll go into then. We're also going to have a little bit of a reflection here, guys. Obviously, a grueling 17-week fantasy MLR season was a whole lot of fun if you've been following along. We're going to just reflect a little bit on how this season was because obviously big changes from our inaugural season that I think everyone thoroughly enjoyed. But we're going to get into all that. Before we do, if you aren't already, make sure you follow us at the Fantasy Ruckers. Handles are up above there on the YouTube video, down below in the description in the podcast. It's been a very, very fun season, and all the Fantasy MLR content comes through those channels. So if you aren't following there already, you will want to do that. We also got a Discord community. Been having a lot of fun there, interacting with our league members and our Fantasy MLR community members as well. And yeah, if you haven't known, we've had a website too, and it's got all the stats up there. It's got all of our fantasy matchup results, all the players, all good stuff. So make sure you check that up as well. But hey, let's break it. Let's get into it, Maddie, because obviously let's talk about this journey that you've had, because it was a pretty ironic one. And Fitzy said it last week. I don't think we could have written the script any better, to be fair.
So Vandy says otherwise.
Fair enough. But
I think there was a lot of script writing involved, if you know what I mean.
But if we talk about where you were, obviously the inaugural season that we had in 2022 was a tough one for you, for both of you. It
Gonna
bottom of
say.
the heap. Didn't quite make the Fantasy Rucker show look that great. That our own hosts, the ones who were in this from the beginning with me of creating this fantasy MLR thing, were probably struggling the most through the entirety of the season. Maddie finishing last place last season. The running joke over the off season was that you earned yourself a poop emoji. John Fitzpatrick of Rugby Morning fully embraced that. He made sure you heard it. He was posting it in the Discord community. It caught on with all the other fantasy league members. It caught on with our new fantasy league members. James Dealey's MLR stats, Eagles overseas, built with Bill Baker. It caught on with everyone, and you were getting all the flack heading into the draft. No one was going to give you anything, and look where you are now. You're on top of the world, name on the championship jersey, second
Mickey
ever
Mouse hat
fantasy
on.
MLR winner. How does it feel, man? How does it feel to be on top from where you started, I guess, a year ago?
Vandy, I'm gonna go into this one. You're
Bro,
gonna
my
love
guts
this whole story.
hurt right now.
I mean, look, Vandy, we went. Not we. I mean, I went from being forgotten by the literal host on this show. You know, I think it was
Sure.
week 15 last year. My name wasn't even said in the Commissioner League update because I was that far down the table.
Yeah,
You know
That's
what?
where I
Okay,
started.
you know what the thing is?
That's where I
Last
was.
year there were some bad teams. Like we're all pretty, even though me and you were like bottom two, we were still kind of close. I'll be more impressed if Give Me the Loots does this same thing next year.
it's true.
I'm already up there. But hey, but look, you know, found our way to the top, drafted a good team. Finally had a year where we had it based on actual rugby skills and knowledge and picking the right players, not just luck, not just tries. I told everybody last year, I
You
said,
did
look,
tell everybody.
once it's not based on luck and tries, I'm coming in and I'm coming in hot. And look what happened. You know what I mean? But hey, all serious. No,
I can't take you seriously with those
No, all,
Mickey Mouse
all
ears on
serious.
your head.
I'm going to Disneyland. I'm getting excited. Let me be. But all serious though, like it was a good year, and I was surprised to see everything happen. But I think to that point, there was a lot of excitement going on in the league. There was a lot of times when we even got to the end where, you know, right up to the last week of before playoffs, we didn't know who was going to be in the playoffs. I didn't know if I was going to win last week, but you know, here I am with a Mickey Mouse hat on, going to Disney World tonight.
That is true, and I mean to just reflect on the
Vanny, I'll bring you back one, man.
if you're listening on the podcast, I don't think I've explained this yet. Somehow Matt has found himself some Mickey Mouse ears that he got on his head. Does it have your
Matt
name
ordered
engraved at the
those on
back by any
Amazon
chance?
right after he found out he won. He's like, they gotta be here tomorrow. I need these.
No, I
Yeah.
couldn't find the one with my name engraved, so this one has your name engraved, Ryan.
There you go. It's the Mickey Mouse ears. I present that to you. But nonetheless, I mean, I feel like there were some key things that obviously went into this huge run of yours. I got to say
The
the
biggest one.
biggest one was it was Vandy. Vandy created this monster, and if you hadn't been following along this season, we throw it back 17 weeks ago, all the way to the draft. Okay, and I
Vandy,
forget
it's your
what
fault.
I forget what round it was. It had to
Seven.
be was
Five.
it 7, 5, 6,
It
7?
was
It was in the-
5. I know exactly it was
Okay,
5.
round 5. Matthew is thinking about a scrum half. He needs to take a scrum half,
Yeah,
and
5.
Vandy's looking for one as well. Matt had all along, all
Hmm.
off season long, has been talking about how highly he was rating Luke Campbell and how excited he was that he was going to be on the Nola Gold. Now, mind you, also another take that hasn't developed as nicely. The fact that Matt had predicted Nola was going to win the MLR champion. They're not even going to make the playoffs this year, but that's a different story. He was very high on Luke Campbell. Vandy also needed a scrum half. And Vandy ends up taking Luke Campbell, I believe, 3 or 4
9
picks
games, baby.
before Maddie. Matt's then sitting there in round 5, panicking, needs a scrum half, doesn't know what
Nate
to do. He knows
Oxford.
they're going to be coming off the board. He ends up picking Nate Oxberger, who not only doesn't even start a game all season long at this scrum half position, but he ends up being and finishing the 2023 Fantasy MLR season as the second best Fantasy MLR player found in round 5 with the intention of starting him at scrum half. ends up being Matt's hero in the final, scoring a whole 20 fantasy points to get in that championship. I mean, that's got to be the biggest out of them all. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, you know what? I think that's definitely got to be up there.
Not luck at all, right?
That
Not
one, that
luck.
one was not luck. I mean, that one,
You know what you got
that one
stupid
I
lucky
knew.
on? That Bodine Walker comes back and doesn't even play 10. Like,
That's true.
you got who was it? Patros just stays in. He's like, you know what, Matt? I'll finish off your fly half. Don't worry, buddy. I got you.
Hey, that's what happens when you got the connects. You know?
I'm
You let 'em
so
know.
bitter. It's unbelievable.
All right. Well, yeah, again, crazy stuff. Matt's the champion now. I guess, Matt, I'll give you a little bit of moment's time here to break down. Obviously, with winning this championship, get your name etched in the fantasy MLR history books. It'll be
Give me
on
some
this
more time.
fantasy Ruckers jersey behind me. We're gonna get that post on social.
Yeah.
The official 2023 fantasy MLR champion. But what also comes in line here with the fantasy MLR championship, winning the fantasy Ruckers league, is a $100 donation to a charity of your choice. And you did preview them last week, but Matt, why don't you speak a little bit about the official charity that will now be getting that $100 now that you've won?
Yeah, so Iroquois Roots Rugby Foundation is going to be getting the $100 after I've won. So I mean, hey, look, the nice thing is that regardless of my toxicity and Vandy's bitterness, it's all for a good cause because the Fantasy Ruckers League and the Fantasy Ruckers are all about donating to those people that are putting money towards a good cause. And Iroquois Roots Rugby is putting money towards growing the game in Indigenous and First Nation communities in Ontario. They're using the game to not only help build an active lifestyle, but also potentially build a competitive pathway for First Nations youth in a pathway that maybe they never saw the opportunity to really have that. So yeah, the $100 will be going to them, and yeah, it's a good thing I won.
Yeah, it certainly is. But yeah, again,
Hey, Andy, where's your $100? Oh,
all right. Well, at the end of the day,
sorry, man.
I'll donate to you because you're basically a charity.
Sorry, man.
yeah, no, again, we love doing this project. We've had a whole lot of fun doing fantasy MLR, and at the end of the day, it's all about giving back to the community. So we're really pumped that we're able to do that, Matt. That's a great cause, really fantastic. So looking forward to be able to help out the Iroquois Roots Rugby Foundation and be able to do everything there for them and help develop that area of the game. It's been a lot of fun. I think last year, JJ John, who was our
BC
inaugural
Grassroots
winner,
Rugby.
BC Grassroots Rugby. So it's really cool that as we try to develop this fantasy MLR thing, make it a reality, grow this thing, hopefully get it to more viewers out there who are interested in playing fantasy MLR. We're also kind of giving back to the sport that is so great and obviously, in our opinion, the greatest sport in the world. And we're so lucky that it is now here in North America. And hopefully fantasy rugby will be here in North America as well in full swing. But all right, and I know we usually do this the other way around, but let's get into the Commissioners League update before we get into the news, because we've got to break down how it exactly came together with this fantasy MLR championship.
I thought that was it. That was all. That was just the update that we needed, eh, Vandy?
Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye, hear ye.
All right, hear ye, hear ye. Here is Commissioner
keep
Yee with
throwing
the
it back,
final
buddy.
fantasy 2023 MLR season update. And yeah, it was an interesting road to get to this point. Like I mentioned at earlier in the show, Maddie finishing the top of the league, finishing the playoffs as its victor, and it took beating Rugby Morning in the final round. You took him down 92.1 points to 74.1. Kind of an odd showing here, Matt, because usually you're up in the triple digits. I know Rugby Morning had gone on a little run here and had scored, I believe it was 3 straight weeks in a row heading into this matchup where he had scored triple digit points. I believe the longest run out of all of our teams heading into this one. So he was looking good, confident, but just not enough. Some of his guys just didn't show up. Some of them did, but it just wasn't enough to take down your ruck and roll team that has been apparently rolling all season long.
Yeah, I mean, we both ran into a little bit of lineup decisions that had to be made. I was missing JP Duplessis. He had to make a decision at 10 with Jordan Chait not in the starting lineup for Seattle. So we both ran into things. At the end of the day, we stuck with our guys for the most part. I took a little bit more risk, and that's fantasy. It kind of just is the way it works. But you have your week. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you do, and it's just the way she goes.
That is very true. Now we can't forget the third place finals matchup as well. Obviously, Matt, last week you were able to beat Hokie in a very tight matchup,
Oof.
taking down the Dankest Anchors. Rugby Morning beating James Dealey's MLR Stats team. So MLR Stats taking on Dankest Anchors in our third place final. And hey, this one's a scary one because Matt, if you had not got, I mean, Dankest Anchor's team seemed to have been rolling at at
Yeah.
the right time. It just was unfortunate timing. Obviously, last week it really was him not putting in who was it that Christian Poitevin,
Poitevin.
who had a
He didn't
massive
make that
week
mistake this
in round
week.
16. Didn't make that mistake this week, which really helped him out get this 107.3 victory over MLR Stats, who put up 97.7. So it's interesting that our third place final had a higher point total than our championship matchup, but nonetheless, this is where we stand. This is how fantasy sports go,
And
and it's
you
the
know
same
what?
for fantasy MLR.
Kudos to MLR Stats. Kudos to James Dealey for being the rookie.
Yeah, I was gonna
Essentially, the
say that, man.
newcomer
Good
to
for
come in,
him.
right? Yeah, come in and really
First year
make
coming
a
in
statement.
hot.
Oh yeah. I mean, Vandy and I last year in our first year, we did not make any type of
We
statement
don't talk
other than
about
the
that
fact
year.
that we stunk.
That's Voldemort.
Yeah, so if we break it all down and then talk around again, it was a very very fun season. Ruck and roll, Matty Yee, our fantasy Ruckers League champion for 2023. Rugby Morning finishing in second place. John Fitzpatrick, a good showing, an admirable showing, just not close enough. We'll see whether or not you can do in 2024. Dankest Anchors getting that final win of the season to get himself that third place spot, in James Dealey's MR Stats in fourth. We got to give a shout out again to last week's matchups. I mean, obviously we had our toilet bowl round last week. Vandy, you lost.
Tough one,
You
Vandy.
ended up giving
Tough one.
back-to-back wins to Stephen Lowen's Feral
That guy's
Hippies
the
That's
goat.
for
my
him to
boy.
be
He deserves it.
back-to-back toilet bowl champion. So he finishes fifth. Vandy, you finish in sixth. And then it is Lads on Tour in the seventh spot, beating Rugby Wrap Up, who finishes eighth. Eagles Overseas in ninth. Give me the Lutes in 10th. So again, just I want to take the time before we get into the news and start really getting into the nitty gritty of this, because this is kind of like a reflective episode. It's a chance for us to kind of feel good about the season that we have, especially as commissioner, because I think getting through, I know last season, especially with how manual it was just such a huge moment to get to this point of the season. But I think this season as well, I think it's a very big milestone here for the Fantasy Ruckers. We had the new website, we had the new stats and all that, and we got through a 2023 season. Pretty much cleanly, I would say, and got to this point, which is, I think, a big shout out to all the people that were involved. MLR Stats is a big part of this. Obviously, Alistair Kirsch-Poole, who is the brainchild and brain mind, I shouldn't say brainchild, brain mind of this brainchild of this website, who has been absolutely fantastic in keeping things going. But I got to give a shout out to all of our league members as well, both the old ones and the new ones. Obviously, we expanded to the 10 teams in this one, and you guys stuck with it right into the end. We'll get more into it in the reflection, but just as we give an update here, I got to give a big shout out to all the members that were involved in this. But Matt, any final words before we move on now to talking about some games? You got any final words for you as the champion here as we start to shift a little bit forward?
No, I've run out of ridiculous.
Zero chance these are his last words, too.
Yeah, I have a feeling
on.
more is to come in the rest of this episode. But unless
For now.
let's get into it, and let's talk a little bit of MLR news and notes. Yes, we are at the tail end of the season. 1 week left remaining in the MLR year, but we still got some stuff coming out. So first big one I would say is a big part of the San Diego Legion has made a pretty big announcement, and that is Will Hooley has announced announcing that he will retire at the end of this season. He's been obviously a big part of them. He's earned 26 caps with the Legion since 2022. Is their second highest point scorer with 107 points. Obviously USA Rugby fly half. He's been one of those guys that has been a staple of rugby in North America, and he's going to hang up the boots after the San Diego Legion. Pretty good campaign in 2023, and hopefully for him at least, that he's going to end it off by lifting that shield at the end of the season, because there's a pretty good chance that the San Diego Legion team is going to do that.
Yeah, I mean, what a player though. I've just got to kind of experience him in the last few years watching the MLR and watching San Diego, but yeah, you can clearly see he's one of the top guys in the MLR, one of the top fly ass in the MLR, and it's always sad to see them go, but always a good reason and a good time for people to walk away from the physical game of rugby.
Absolutely. All right, and then let's shift on a little bit of a quicker news here. And I would say more of a positive sign. Moving forward, and I will say with that Will Hooley retirement, it's gonna be interesting. Obviously, we're not looking ahead to 2024 yet, but that fly half position, obviously, it would be interesting. Last year, with Joe Pearson at the fullback, him leaving a big part of it. There's kind of a a mirror image there. Who's going to replace all these points? Something to think about as you think about this offseason. I know a lot of the league members are already doing their work for the 2024 year. If you're going to beat this guy, ruck and roll. But yeah, a little bit of news here from the Old Glory DC side of things. Not so much from a fantasy standpoint, but more so from just, I guess, optimism with the growth of the MLR. And this is always a good sign. A few new owners joining the Old Glory DC team as minority stakeholders. We got Washington Nationals minority owner Paxton Baker, Grammy Award winner Verdine White, and an investment manager Pablo Calderini are joining the club as I guess as part of their ownership group, or as part of they're saying as join the club as investors. For me, this is just a good sign that people are still willing to interject money into Major League Rugby, and there is room for growth, and people see that this is a league that is on the uptick, which is obviously good for fantasy MLR.
Yeah, it's yeah. I mean, it's good to see also that other people who have involvement in other major American sports
Mm-hmm.
leagues are also investing in this league the same kind of similar fashion. So that's a good sign. Hopefully, we see some, Ogor DC reap some of those benefits of more investment coming in. Maybe they get a bigger field.
Yeah.
Maybe we see a better product on the field. Who knows? So it's always good to see, like you said, more money getting pushed in.
Well, because
Right.
sometimes
And
that can sway a decision, right? How good your facility is, how good this is, that is.
Yeah.
Some things behind the scenes.
I mean, what's interesting too is at the baby stages of this major. Obviously, I think we're like what 5 or 6 years into this league. I think what's interesting is that that's kind of what the league needs right now. Obviously, this league is not making a huge ton of money at this point in time. I don't even know how many teams, if any, are profitable at this point. But the fact that people, like you said, Matt, even guys that are invested in other major sports leagues still see a value in investing in these teams, and a future payoff possibly for investing in these teams. It's a positive sign for Major League Rugby. So definitely moving in the right direction. But yeah, again, not much news and notes as we enter the tail end of the season, but I thought those were two pretty big things that we needed to at least touch on for at least a little bit as we start to break down these round 17 matchups in this championship fantasy MLR round. You ready to get into it?
Yes, sir.
Do it.
All right, let's do it. Let's start off with the first matchup of the weekend. Houston taking on Old Glory at home. This one was an interesting one. I mean, I didn't expect the outcome that was going to be, but Houston really taking care of business in this one. Outside of a set piece try by Old Glory DC, it was an early score by Houston off of the kickoff that really got things going, and Houston just really didn't look back, and they ended up taking this one pretty convincingly over their Eastern Conference rival.
That
Yeah,
tandem,
yeah.
that
Oh, yeah.
tandem of Coates and Dyer, man. Those guys.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was a good game to get Coates back. That's for sure. But yeah, for me, like you saw the Old Glory DC lineup heading into the game, and they've locked up, I guess, a playoff spot. I guess they weren't thinking too much about trying to get a win here. But you saw the lineup they put out, and you kind of saw the score already. You saw the lineup that Houston put out. You compared it to what Old Glory DC put out, and you just you kind of expected this type of result, and Houston came in and they showed exactly why you should not put a B side up against them. And especially they needed the win, and they got it on the week that they needed it. But yeah, Houston kind of came in and really just dominated that.
It is interesting too that they went with that kind of lineup because yeah, I guess they already had the playoff spot locked up, and maybe health in their eyes is a little bit more important. But I mean, they're still in a race with New York for home field advantage in that first round. So it's really interesting to see how they did that. But again, if you're weighing out different things, injury, stuff like that, maybe this was a week that you kind of rested some of the guys. And I believe the Eastern Conference is not yet locked up, so even despite the loss, they still can figure out, I believe, in this last round 18, who will get that home field advantage.
Mhm.
But hey, nice to see Cali Martinez get into the starting lineup,
That's for
though.
sure.
Friend of the show, Matt, your boy. You've played with him. Exciting to see him there wearing that number 1 for Old Glory DC.
Yeah, it was awesome. It's great to see some of the boys get in there, especially when it's someone you know. And yeah, it's just great seeing them get their first start, I believe.
All right. Well, let's start breaking down some of these top performers here from this game. We'll start off with the Houston SaberCats. You mentioned him, Matt. David Coates. I mean, yeah, what a time for you to get him back in your lineup. Obviously, out with injury for the past few weeks, but he comes back big time. 16.1 fantasy points, 77 minutes played, scores the try, 72 meters gain at that fly half position with 8 tackles. Pretty impressive stuff by David Coates after being off for a few weeks.
Yeah, I mean, he looked like he was coming right back to where he left off. He didn't look like he was having any type of lingering injury or they rushed him back. He looked like he was able to use the footwork that he needed to. I know there was a lower body injury and he looked good at everything except for the conversion kicks, which I mean, he probably could have made more of those, but it is what it is.
Absolutely. And then Veroniki Tico Solomone looking pretty good again as well. 19.1 fantasy points in this one, 81 minutes a try, 125 meters gain, add the try assist as well. He was a big time player for Houston, and he's been a guy that's kind of been up and down throughout this season, but he's had spurts where he can pop off here for those close to 20-point performances.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of his points came off of that last try.
That's
Yeah.
yeah, sure.
And half of that try was him jogging. He was actually walking some of it. So yeah, I mean, good performance by him. I think Vandy brought up the guy that really we need to talk about in that back 3, and he only played like 50 minutes
Yeah.
this match,
Mhm.
but scores 2 tries. Christian Dyer. I mean,
Yeah.
Christian Dyer was in form that game, and I mean, not even 40 minutes, 36 minutes, and he gets 15.8 fantasy points and 2 tries. That is just ridiculous.
I think he had
Yeah.
2 tries within 20 minutes or something. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, it was dumb.
I mean, great
But,
play by Davey Coates on both of them, you can say, but
yeah.
Absolutely. All right. And then shifting over to the Old Glory DC side of things. Again, it's a tough one. Only 1 try scored, and it came off of a set piece. And on top of that, it was a penalty try. So no players really getting that big time points bonus here. I mean,
Yeah.
what? If you had to pick out one guy, Maddie, like maybe I'd say Nico Jones looked pretty solid in this one. But
Yeah.
even then, not necessarily that fantasy relevant.
Yeah, Nico Jones did actually look good there. But yeah, it's kind of tough. It's kind of tough. I mean, maybe when Tusitala came on, he seemed to have the ball a lot in hand. But yeah, that was a tough one. By the way, in this match, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the same announcer for every Old Glory DC game, but that announcer literally loves Tusitala. He literally cannot stop talking about him. It's like, oh, you'd always see Tusitala. It's weird seeing him not in the 9 jersey. Oh, it's weird seeing him in the 21 jersey. Oh, if he was in here, you would have ran that one in and scored. And I'm like, I get it. I understand. You love him. I don't need to know.
Maybe he's
I don't
right,
need to
Matt.
be part
Maybe
of
he's
this
right.
relationship.
I mean, this is the first. It was what, the first match that
I think it's the first
Tusitala
match in a while that he hasn't
started for
Yeah.
Old Glory DC. Pretty interesting. But yeah, again, not much fantasy relevance to be had on the Old Glory DC side. Nico Jones there with 11.5 fantasy points off of 92 meters gained, 6 tackles, and 81 minutes played. All right, well, let's shift on over to the next matchup here. We'll talk about Rugby Atlanta and New York. New York traveling to Georgia to take on the Rugby Atlanta side. And this one was an interesting one because obviously the New York looked like they were kind of running away with things. Then Atlanta gets that kind of cheeky try that Tirangatira Waitokia scores in that one. And then they start to claw themselves back. But then again, New York just pulls away with things and end up just taking it pretty solidly.
Yeah, this is what we need to see from New York, and maybe they're hitting their stride at the perfect time heading into playoffs. They've moved up into second in the Eastern Conference, but their backline is starting to look like the backline that we expect. It's against Rugby Atlanta, who struggles, but we see these spurts of that back line looking good, and we've seen it a bit more consistently these past couple weeks, which is good to see. And it seems like Brooklyn Hardiker has solidified himself on that wing,
Yeah.
and is a big part of that offense. And the other thing is that they're figuring out. Fitzy brought it up last week. Just give Fido the ball. Just give him
Yep.
the ball, and you see good things.
Well, even like Cole with those 2 Hardacre
Yeah.
tries. I mean, he
looked
gifted
good.
those on a handbasket to Hardacre.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
those were made by Cole.
Cole looked really, really good. Looked fast. Yeah,
Mhm.
Brooklyn Hardiker looked good as well. Yeah, the back line looking pretty solid. Jason Emery looked solid too.
Jason
I mean,
Emery.
with him, we've talked about how solid he's been. Maybe not getting the results for New York, but I mean, he's been pretty darn good.
Mhm.
For the fill in for Jack Hyden, who was back in the lineup, not starting, but he was
Yep.
back. So that's a good sign for New York heading into the playoffs as well. Yeah, I mean, on the Atlanta side of things. They're just not as good of a team. I think that's kind of what the moral of the story here was
Yep.
in this matchup. They kept it. They got their opportunities. They got their chances. They were able to punch it in a couple times, but just they didn't have that explosive ability. It seems like as New York can have at times. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean, the one guy from Atlanta I will say I was surprised with was Austin White at
okay,
15. I mean, he was when I was watching, he was surprisingly I think he's not a natural 15. He's usually on the wing, but he surprisingly looked like he fit in. He was able to get carry meters, 99 meters gained, 9.9 fantasy points. So it was interesting to see that, see him do well. But other than that, again, like, and outside of Tarangatira,
Yeah, I was gonna say
Waitakea,
Waitakea did good.
it's kind of tough to find players on the Rugby Atlanta squad that really were fantasy relevant.
absolutely. All right, let's start on the New York side. We mentioned him, Brooklyn Hardiker, 20 plus point fantasy performance. Matt, you mentioned starting to solidify himself in this lineup here. He's gone. He started 2 straight weeks before he had an off. Or excuse me, he has started 3 straight weeks. In all those weeks, from a fantasy point standpoint, has almost scored double-digit points. Week 15, 15.1. Week 16, 9.8, and then in this one, 20.3 fantasy points, 83 minutes play, 2 tries, 66 meters gained, and 9 tackles. Brooklyn Hardiker, definitely a guy that is going to be on the radar, I think, next season if he's still on this New York lineup side. But yeah, pretty good stuff from him. And then just looking down the list for other Rugby New York guys, we got to talk about,
You got to
obviously,
talk about Caleb Geiger. That's who we got to talk about. I mean, Caleb
what,
Geiger
in his 26 tackles?
and his 26 tackles.
Yeah, pretty crazy.
Ridiculous from the front row. Just 26 tackles. I mean, 68 minutes, doesn't even play a full game, gets 26 tackles in those 68 minutes.
Yeah.
That is just silly.
You had some big
11.6.
tacklers though. Like Brent, I think O'Connor got over 20.
Yeah.
Dalzell got like 20
Yeah.
or something. Like just
Yeah.
big time tackles by these boys.
Absolutely. And then just talking about this back line as well. I mean, Ed Fido, you mentioned him. Matt wasn't able to score in this one, but still reaches the triple-digit
Thank
meters
goodness.
gain mark. Gets 12.9 fantasy points. Goes back-to-back week with double-digit fantasy points. 4 of the last 5 matchups that he's played in, double-digit fantasy points. Yeah, in this one, 12.9, 101 meters gained, 83 minutes, 6 tackles. Pretty solid stuff. Got to talk about Jason Emery because, again, 13.5 fantasy points with those 3 conversion kicks, penalty kick. We talked about how well he's been filling in at this fly half roll. 54 minutes played, 36 meters gained, a try, 3 tackles. Pretty solid stuff there. Anyone else that we got to mention on this this Rugby New York side? I will say, Car Pryor's little try there looked pretty nifty. In that one,
Nice
that
little
one
footwork.
was pretty solid. But nonetheless, a nice little spread out fantasy performance there by the New York Ironworkers, highlighted by Brooklyn Hardiker. But let's move on here to Rugby Atlanta. I guess the big one here, obviously, is Tarangatira Waitakea with that nice try that he scored in this one. 18.9 fantasy points, 160 meters gained, a try, 83 minutes played, 6 tackles. He was probably the highlight of this Rugby Atlanta offense. Outside of maybe you could highlight Sidney Tobias looked pretty solid here.
Yeah, I mean,
we
got it.
Rugby
Yeah,
Atlanta.
we got it. I think we also had to bring him. I mean, he did score a try. He technically scored 2 since one of them got called back. But yeah, no. I mean, I don't know how he's doing it. He just seems to continue to not just find the try zone, but also rack up meters gained.
Yeah.
He seems to always be one of the main ball carriers when they're just going through their phases, which is, which you love to see as a fantasy manager, right? Like those are the guys that you want to have.
Yeah.
And it shows in his points. I mean, 4 double-digit weeks as a front row in a row.
Crazy.
Yeah.
That's-
Ever since
crazy.
he's joined the league, he's essentially
Exactly.
been performing. And I think again, kind of like how we mentioned with Brooklyn Artiker, this is a guy that you're probably going to have on your radar as a front rower. Very rare to have that. And I mean, he fills out all the boxes. He's a hooker. He's going to have those opportunities from a set piece standpoint. This was his first try of the year for him in this round 17 match. He might
Plays
be
a
someone
full
you're
game
looking
pretty
at.
much every time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
basically, and it'll be interesting to see if he returns with his Rugby Atlanta side. Definitely wouldn't be surprised if he's someone that's has some eyes on him when it comes to the lead up to the 2024 fantasy season. All right, you want to shift on over to the next game here, guys?
Yep.
We'll shift on over now to our next matchup, and I know Vandy's excited to talk about this one.
Well,
It's
hold
the-
on. Before we get into that one, I think we missed over the whole, the matchup of the week, the one with the most on the line, the Dallas Jackals versus Nola Gold.
That's what I know. That's what I'm getting into because that.
Oh, I thought you were getting. Oh,
No, you know,
I thought
you-
you were gonna skip and go to the
No,
other
no,
Vandy's
no.
favorite
I got
matchup.
some.
eh?
I
Hey,
got some
Vandy, you like that other matchup too, right?
You know what? There's so many words I'm not allowed to say on this show, and I want to just say I'm so bad right now.
All right. Well.
Perfect. Let's go to your favorite matchup. Then.
All right. Well,
Ryan,
this
do
one-
that
this
beat
one-
noise.
I
Do
I
that
wish I
beep
had
noise
it
for the next
on-
30 seconds.
I wish I had it on hand with me. But nonetheless, this one is an interesting one from a fantasy side of things, and we're talking
Stop.
about the Dallas Jackals
Stop.
Nola Gold
This game
standpoint.
is the worst.
15 Nola Gold taking the victory
was
over
awful.
Dallas Jackals 10 points. Yeah, not that great of a match. But I think the reason why I say this was Vandy's favorite matchup is because he spotted something that one of the commentators said that I think put a smile on his face, or at least made him giggle a little bit.
It made me hit
And you
pause.
can
And,
relate to it.
it made me pause it and rewind it about 4 times. If I was one of the woke people, I was writing in about that one, man. So what
Well,
happened is I don't know the guy's name, but he received the
big
ball. Big bald man. Gets the ball, takes an awkward fall, and it looked bad. I thought he popped his knee too. The announcer kind of, notices that. Play goes on. He gets up and he goes, "Oh, he must have just spotted a burrito on the field." I had paused that, rewind it a couple times, like, you son of a.
as a big guy, yeah,
Homie
you
takes a
guys.
spill because he's massive, and you tell him he's brushing through the grass for burrito trimmings.
Hey, look, for me, it was the delivery. He just said that and just moved on. He said it. I didn't even notice he said that.
Yeah, there was no like giggle or nothing. He's just like,
Nope.
okay, pass the breakfast burrito.
You know,
Here we go with the try.
You know that he's had that one locked in. You know what I mean?
been
Like,
waiting for a
he's
big
been
boy to
waiting
fall.
for a big
No
boy to
doubt.
fall like that, and he's like, when that happens, I'm going to say that. But nonetheless, that at least made a boring matchup somewhat interesting because from a fantasy perspective,
This one, it wasn't even
yeah.
a fantasy
No, it
perspective,
was-
Ryan. This one's, I don't understand how 2 teams with absolutely nothing on the line can play such boring rugby. I mean, they decided that they were going to play territory in a game where they're both last place or second last place in their conference.
Dude, that last whistle
And
goes
they're
off,
gonna-
so many Dallas guys had their hands on the head like they just missed the
Yeah.
playoffs. I see
Yeah.
more emotion out of them missing or losing than when Utah lost.
It
Which
was
we'll get
hey,
into.
we don't have to get there yet, Vandy. Come on, hold your emotions back. But yeah, it was just I don't understand how you continue to kick the ball back to each other, kick for points in a game that literally means absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
Like put on a show, put on something. Like you're 2 teams that have nothing to play for and nothing to lose, and that's the product that you're deciding that
Give
you're
it the
going to play
beans.
this. Exactly. You're going to play this absolutely ridiculous,
Yeah.
boring brand of rugby and yeah. I mean,
Even the announcer
this
said it
game
best. This
sucked.
is when you look at the man beside you and choose what kind of man you want to be. And it's like, I guess not men at all.
Well, they
yeah,
were
the
all
man that walks out of the stadium.
They were all just looking for burritos in the grass, I guess.
Heard that.
But yeah, I mean, looking at it from a fantasy perspective, I mean, who do you really choose from this Dallas Jackals side? I mean,
Dallas Jackals. I mean,
maybe Danny Christensen, who from the 9 position was able to rack up some pretty solid meters gain.
Yeah.
I mean, he got 13 fantasy points in this one, 83 meters gain, 9 tackles, a breakdown
he
steal.
stinks.
Conrado Rura
I mean-
got some tackles.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of that has been a staple of his from that back row position. I mean 9.4 fantasy points with those 16 tackles, but yeah, there's really nothing to be had. Matt, you started Adrian Boyson in this one, even that was
Oof.
not
Even
that
he
that great.
stunk.
It stuck, so it wasn't that great matchup. But we'll shift on over to Nola Goldside. I mean, again, not that great. Aaron Matthews
He's
looked
the
pretty.
only guy.
Yeah.
He's the
He's
only
the
guy
only
that
guy
looks
we need to
look
talk about.
he looked pretty solid for Nola.
Yep.
Obviously getting the start at that center position with JP Duplessis out.
Trainer looked good.
50.1 fantasy points, 75
Trainer
meters
did look
gained,
good.
a try, 71 minutes played, 7 tackles. Looked pretty solid there in replacement of JP Duplessis.
Oh, but Aaron Matthews has been on the wing and he's been running dudes over, and he just did the exact same thing, just at the center position.
Yep.
It was ridiculous. So yeah, I mean, he got the opportunity. The game still stunk, but yeah, he looked good out there.
Yeah, and then Jordan Trainer, like you mentioned, Vandy, 108 meters gained, 80 minutes played, 5 tackles, led for 11.8 fantasy points. Yeah, he looked pretty solid too. But again, just slim pickings here from a game that
Yep.
really had nothing going on, which I don't think we need to spend much more time about. All right, this is the one that I want to get
Yeah,
Vandy's reaction from. This
Vandy.
one's a tough one. Utah
Vandy.
welcoming Chicago to town. And let me tell you first, before we get into it, just to milk this a little bit longer, I got to keep on talking about how beautiful that stadium is. I mean, when the sun is setting in
it's
the
so
background,
beautiful
Nice
to listen
stadium.
it's great.
Mhm.
Fantastic.
Great-
But
great,
that is not the storyline heading into this one. Obviously, playoff hopes on the line. This one should be in the bag for the Utah Warriors taking on a struggling Chicago Hounds team. And not only do they lose to the Chicago Hounds, they lose to them in heartbreaking fashion. Utah up by 5 points heading into the extra time, heading into the over the 80 minutes. And Chicago able to get it done to get their second win of the season. Not only ties up the game, but they slot in the 2-point conversion and take the victory 26-24. Utah Warriors playoff hopes done. Tough one, Vandy.
I don't want to talk after that. That just
I know.
depressed the shit out of me, man.
What's up,
Yeah,
Vandy?
it's a tough one, man. It's a tough one. I mean, there was a funny meme on MLR Reddit. It was a grave that said Utah Warriors playoff chances, and all the people huddling around it, they all just had logos of Chicago Hounds faces on them. But what I gotta say though is, I mean, in this one, I don't even know if the Chicago Hounds beat you. I just think Julian Dominguez beat you.
I was gonna say, okay, this
That-
this is karma for me. Okay, this is because 4 weeks ago I said Julio Dominguez isn't even worth starting anymore. I said
That's true.
it's
You
only
did say
Billy
that.
Meeks.
Pull up the tape.
Don't even play Dominguez. And he goes, and he circled that date on his calendar and he
Hey.
spit on the podcast after I said that. Okay.
Fitzy listened to you too.
Yeah. First of all, okay, Clive and Lobster, love you, buddy.
Fitzy didn't start Julian Dominguez.
He
No, he
did?
didn't.
Oh boy.
Oh.
Oh, boy.
Sorry, buddy.
And
You
we'll talk
listen,
about in the next matchup another guy you should have
Laubser?
started but didn't.
not good. And then that tackle at the end that you could have made on Dominguez and you let him. Okay, McEnany. I can't say
Oh,
anything.
hold on.
McEnany-
We're putting that on McEnany. Come on.
McEnany could have made that tackle. McEnany's done a
That
lot for
was-
this team. Lobster's
Ah.
like, oh, I haven't played here in 6 months. Slip piece. Okay. And another big thing, Mika Cruz going down at like the 20-minute mark sucked.
Yeah, that's tough.
That was tough. Billy Meeks. I mean, Billy Meeks looked great, even though obviously,
I mean,
Julian Dominguez looked, he was the star player. I think Billy Meeks, he put the team on his back a little bit on some of those plays, man.
I mean, what I will say is that one, it was a back and forth affair when it shouldn't have been a back and forth affair
Shouldn't have
between
been.
the Utah Warriors and Chicago Hounds, which leads to my second point. And hey, Chicago showed some signs of life, and we've been on this podcast saying on a week in and week out how hard it has looked for the Chicago Hounds. Team
Signs
to
of life in
score
the second
tries.
half.
In the second, true, fair enough.
Yeah, we were
But-
dominating them.
It was they look like they can score at times, which we hadn't seen from the Chicago Hounds this season, really, up to this point. So kudos to them for playing spoilers and ending the Utah Warriors' chances. But yeah, definitely a shocking result, probably the most
And-
shocking result.
Joe
of the
Mano,
weekend.
Yeah.
that was a nasty almost try you had. Should have passed back to Joel Hodgson. Didn't. After that happened,
Yeah.
I'm like, we're losing this game, man. We're losing this game.
Well, I mean, look, I think you should have known you're losing the game when I saw Julian Dominguez keep that ball in with some crazy soccer skills, footwork.
Even his
it was-
try at the end, I'm like, that's shit. What
I
are
mean,
you
that was
playing
just
like this
individual.
for?
He had no,
You didn't do this at all this year. Maybe you'd be in playoffs. You want to do more stuff like that. Whatever.
Yeah,
If we're gonna play like that, then we don't deserve to be in playoffs. To get my heart broken next week. Like,
That's true. That is true. Well, all right. Well, let's talk about some fantasy performers in this one. I mean, we got to start off then with Julian Dominguez. 25.6 fantasy points, 68 meters gained, the hat trick, try performance, and 11 tackles. I mean, again, this was a guy that just absolutely put the team on his back and got all the scoring done for the Chicago Hounds side to beat the Utah team.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
mean, we've already said enough about him, so
Yeah.
let's
All
just
right.
move on.
And then shifting over to another player again, Billy Meeks looks solid in this one. And what other guys look? Tinashe
Krishnan.
Muchina, who I didn't know had started. I don't believe has started a match this season. I mean, 86
No.
meters gained, 10 tackles in this matchup in 82 minutes played, 11.6 points. And then yeah, got to mention Vandy, who you're saying that Duke Krishnan obviously scoring the other try for the Chicago Hounds. One try, 55 meters gained in his, I believe, his fifth start of the season. Hasn't started a match since week 6, but he gets 68 minutes played, a try, 55 meters gained for a 7-point solid fantasy point performance. But again, all that really coming from Julian Dominguez. And then on the Utah Warriors side, I mean, this is what's funny about the Utah Warriors, right? And I guess this is the parallels. This is the parallels between fantasy and non-fantasy, like watching the game just as a viewer, just watching the performance, because obviously you're not happy with his Utah Warriors performance, but there's a whole bunch of fantasy relevance to be had on this side despite the loss. I mean, you look at
say that about every single game we play.
I know,
Lance
it's fair enough, but I mean, it's the team. I mean, if there was a team that you wanted players and you wanted stock in with players, Utah, despite them having kind of an up and down season, I mean, they were a team that you wanted to have a piece of. Matt, you mentioned it, Lance Williams did solid. 14.4 fantasy points, a try, 43 minutes, 43 meters gained, 12 tackles, 82 minutes played. Even Joe Mono, who ended up being our number 1 fantasy point performer, has gone 6 straight weeks of double-digit fantasy point performance.
Beast.
9 out of 10 last straight weeks have been double-digit fantasy point performances. In the 17 weeks that he started, he's also been an Iron Man. Like, I mean, this guy has been played a whole bunch this season. I believe he only missed like maybe 1 or 2 matches.
2 matches.
He has not scored double-digit out of the 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Out of the 15 matches that he started in and played in, because in every match he appeared in, he was a starter. He only didn't score double-digit fantasy points 3 times out of 15 matches.
What a surprise.
And all of them.
Honestly, man, he's been the biggest surprise on Utah.
Yeah.
Biggest surprise in fantasy sports, fantasy MLR, to be honest. Like this guy was a guy that was drafted, I think, at the tail end of our fantasy draft. Ends up being dropped. Ends up being the number 1 fantasy player in the 2023 season. Had 4 straight 20-point performance leading up to this round 17 matchup, and this one 14.4 fantasy points, no try even, 104 meters gained, a try assist, and 5 tackles. I mean, Joe Mono, he's been the surprise of the season and the steal. So many titles that we'll obviously get into for Joe Mono.
Yeah, just what a beast. I mean, we've said that every week, so I don't even know if there's any more to say.
Yeah. Another guy I want to mention, Joel Hodgson, looked pretty solid. I mean, he's a guy that's been pretty locked in for Utah at the fly half position. Vandy, obviously.
It's not the most points he scored, but I think it's one of the better games I've watched him play. He looked to be there. Those support lines and everything. Like I said, he should have 2 tries, whatever. He just looked good. He, even that last play when for some reason Laubser and McEnany couldn't make a tackle, at least he was there and tried.
Yeah.
Tried harder than those 2.
15.5 fantasy points in 82 minutes played, 57 meters gained, a try and a tackle. He's been on a pretty good roll too. I mean, 5 of the last 6 matchups that he's played in, double-digit fantasy points, and that's pretty solid at that fly half position. Obviously was an instrumental part for you, Vandy, and your fantasy team having him.
2 years in a row, I just rely on my kickers, baby.
There you go. And then outside that,
Big Joe to Big Joel.
Yeah.
exactly.
Something about those
So-
first 3 letters.
Oh yeah.
There you go. But anyone else you want to mention on this Utah team? I think that was pretty much.
No, we
I
gotta
think
move
that's
on.
it fantasy wise, but no, I
Not
mean
hard.
last one we gotta talk about Billy a little bit. Fantasy wise,
Yeah.
I think he got 7.4 fantasy points, but just watching him, just a big lad, just
Dude, he is,
lumbering
and he
through.
moves so fast for being as big as he
Oh,
is.
he moves. Yeah. And the fact that he started in the second row, ended up at 8. That's a guy that is going to be good to have. And would be a good.
You'd rather him
good guy to
start.
have
You'd
in-
rather him start second row though. He's
Yeah.
not going to get a
Yeah.
ton of points for a back row player, but
Yeah,
he'd do well as
exactly.
a second row.
Exactly.
All right, shifting over now to the next matchup, the Toronto Arrows welcoming in the San Diego Legion into
Oh.
town, and this
Ho,
one
ho, ho.
interesting because at halftime. It looked to be something. I mean, Toronto Arrows going into the half leading, I believe, 17-7.
7, yeah.
Yeah.
Off of you could argue maybe a little bit of a lucky try that was scored, I believe, by I want to say Will Grant, who ended
Yeah.
up scoring it in from there, off of that was it the knock onto the boot, I think it was that is that the
Something
right
like
one,
that.
something like that. But yeah, I mean, Toronto leading up to it, and you thought, okay, you know what? This is San Diego Legion team, but if there's any team that you're not going to count out in a matchup that they're losing at halftime, it's probably going to be the San Diego Legion team, and they end up putting up 43 points in the half. I mean, they were up, I believe, 18-17. I want to say at one point, something around there, and I think in like half an hour and 30 minutes, they put up like 32 points or something.
It was ridiculous.
Crazy. I mean,
man.
the San Diego Legion team, when they're clicking, they are clicking, but I will say there are concerns that they were losing to the Toronto Arrows
Yeah.
at halftime. 17.
I mean, look, Toronto's defense has never looked that good all season. They never looked as good as they looked in that first half all season. And they played, courageous defense against a San Diego Legion side that frankly was dominating most of that game and was dominating even when they were losing in the first half. They were dominating. But we've seen this before from San Diego. They did it against Chicago. They go into the sheds in a tight game at half. They come out in the second half and put on a show.
Yep.
We've seen that, the San Diego Legion team and the way that they play offense, I think how quick the service is and how quick the ball is. I don't understand how they get the ball available so quickly for Richard Judd, but it just wears out defenses and you can't sustain that all game. Toronto tried, but yeah, I think they met a Toronto defense in that first 30 minutes that was really, the best that they've been all season.
You know what? It seems a little bit too like I know they didn't have first locked in with Seattle right on their heels, but some of it's got to just be like, do we need to go out and play our hearts out right now? Because there's more on the line. Like they didn't really sit anybody. Their starting lineup looked pretty usual. Osberger started. Mike Taylor started. Yeah.
Ma Nanus and
Will
Samuel
Hooley
Lolo was on the
started.
bench. But yeah, I mean, it's crazy. Again, I don't think there's any other team in the league, and I can confidently say this, that is able to put up 43 points in a half as easy as San Diego is.
And then at the end, they just decided, hey, we're going to keep playing.
Yeah.
We're going to keep playing for another 5 minutes. We want to score
Why
more.
not?
And they just kept going and they kept going until Mikey Teo finally said, all right.
There's another guy, him and Ed
We're
Fido,
done here.
I swear to God, are the two guys that you can walk off the field after letting them blow you up and the coach isn't going to say anything. Because it's like, yeah, you go out and tackle them.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's true.
That is
All right, well,
true.
let's start off with this Toronto Arrows side. Not many, I guess, fantasy relevant point scores on this one, especially if you're only scoring 17 points and not necessarily in the most dynamic ways. I mean, the big one.
Well, hold on. Before we get into that, I think we have to bring up the fact they're the first ever team to start an all Canadian starting 15.
Is that
Really?
so? I didn't see
They're
that.
the first. Well, obviously they're the first team. They're the only Canadian team. But yeah, it was the first time they've ever started a full Canadian 15. I mean, to their detriment because they clearly started bringing on guys once they started getting smoked. Like I think maybe that second half looks a little bit different if they had Tassi on there the whole time, or
Sure.
had some of their key guys. And so yeah. But
Well,
anyways, before we got into that, I just want to bring that up.
Yeah,
'cause,
absolutely. And again, good to see
Canada,
your
go
good to see your
Canada.
good to see your boy Owen Rudden in the lineup as well.
Yep.
Starting there. And friend of the show. All right. Well, I'd like to talk about Captain Canada or Lucas Rumble. Obviously has had a tough, I would say from a fantasy standpoint, a tough season because I think there was a lot of hope for Lucas Rumble heading into the season from a fantasy MLR standpoint. This is a guy that historically has been able to get a lot of breakdown steals. Haven't really seen that this much this season. He's been a guy that's a tackle, pretty good tackle machine. It's been up and down this season, but to see him come out in this one, 11.8 fantasy points in 69 minutes played, got the try he needed, 51 meters, 9 tackles. It was good to see Lucas Rumble kind of have some sort of fantasy relevancy here.
Yeah, no, it's. I think we had him up there a bit higher in the start of the season, just because we thought of how lethal he would be around the breakdown. And you know what? It's tough to be lethal around the breakdown when you're losing all the time. So
And that is
on the
true.
back.
And I mean, it is volatile too. I mean, I think that's one thing I've learned in this is that I think those breakdown steals are just so tough. It's hard to kind of replicate that
Yeah.
consistently going out. And then yeah, I mean, from a fantasy, I mean, we talked about the Will Grant try, but again, not really fantasy relevant there.
We're gonna
Only
talk about
19.
Owen Rattan, old Curly there, getting 9.3 fantasy points. 5 meters gain, electric. 1 try assist, 11 tackles, but the 2 breakdown steals.
There you go. Talking
What
about
an
breakdown
absolute
steals.
animal. I mean, doesn't even need the meters gain, just needs the steals and the tackles. So great to see from the guy.
All right. Well, the time that we will need is to break down all these try scorers on the San Diego Legion side because, man, when you're putting up 50 points, especially in a half, you're going to have a lot of them. I guess the biggest one is Thomas Awake, who was able to have a big time performance, 2 try performance in this one, 21 fantasy points, now has 3 straight games of 20 fantasy point performances, 83 minutes played, 2 tries, 85 meters gained, 5 tackles. This is a guy, he's been going under the radar, man, because he's had, ever since week 3, he's only had 1 fantasy point performance under 8 points.
Crazy.
Every other fantasy point performance has been in the double digits since round 3.
Yeah, wild. I think he was a guy that kind of came in last year. I think I said this already. He came in last year, didn't see too much in this year. He's really showing his form. But look, I think some of those tries to him don't happen without the likes of Mikey Teo.
Sure. He
Mikey
looked great.
Teo
He looked
was
fantastic.
Unreal. I mean, this guy just was setting up everything left and right, was
The
making the right
distribution.
decision every time. He just looked good, and he was classic Mikey Teo for the San Diego Legion that game.
Yeah, 15.8 fantasy points, 83 minutes played, 87 meters gained, 3 try assists, 2 tackles. Yeah, those 3 try assists just really highlighting the distribution that he had in this one. Got to also talk about your man there, Matt, who showed up for you in your final matchup, Nate Augsburger, finishing the season as the second best fantasy MLR player in 2023. 20 fantasy points on the dot. I mean, talk about a guy that has shown up for you in your playoff run here. 18.2 in your semifinal matchup, 20 fantasy points in your championship matchup, 95 meters gained in this one, a try assist, 10 tackles in 83 minutes.
You know what? Just to cap off my fantasy run, he just finished the game out at his true soul position that I drafted him in, scrum half. He finishes the game off in that position, gets a try assist in that position, goes, hey, if you needed me here this season, I would have done it. And you know what? He did do it. So right when I needed, he did and showed up as my scrum half.
Yeah. And then got to talk about Tien Lutz. I mean, he's a guy that's kind of been not really relevant this fantasy season.
Oh, he hasn't been playing, so
Can't depend on him.
Yeah, kind of been spurting in and out, but I mean, this week 21.9 fantasy points, a try, 120 meters gained,
Fitzy
13
Adams
tackles.
sitting right on the bench.
There you go. And then the last one I got to mention, and the guy that also has been huge for you this season, Matt, Richard Judd. I mean, you could probably argue, I mean, we're going to get into the numbers as we go throughout the offseason, position by position, but Richard Judd, I mean, 11.2 fantasy points in this round 17 matchup, 59 meters gained, a try, 6 tackles. He might be my favorite scrum half to own in fantasy right now.
No, I mean, look, the support lines that he runs is just, it sets him up for a try every time. And also just the way that San Diego Legion's offense is, they break the line so often that it gives him so many opportunities, and just the way that he's able to distribute really quick ball helps their offense. And you see a difference when he's on. And yeah, he's been a catalyst for that team, and probably honestly one of the reasons why they're so good this year.
And just got to also mention Shiloh Klein as well. 14.9 fantasy points in the start for Samuel Malolo. 57 meters gained, a try, 14 tackles. Pretty solid in that one too. Obviously, the benefactor of that set piece try. So again, turned out to be a matchup that San Diego just really put the pedal to the metal and put up a whole bunch of points despite being down 17-7. But like Matt said, defense of the year for the Toronto Arrows in that first 30 minutes, I guess,
Yeah.
really making it tough. All right, well, let's shift on over to the last matchup of the weekend. And I know there's some controversy that we're going to get into here about this matchup that has been circulating around social media, but also the matchup of the week. I mean, this is a potential preview of what we could see in the MLR
Conference.
finals.
Yeah.
But to me, I think what really was proven to me is that the New England Free Jacks, I might even be more confident with the New England Free Jacks than the San Diego Legion right now. The scoring ability of San Diego Legion scares me, but New England just knows how to be consistent on the defensive front, knows how to score points. They kind of are the entire package deal, and they really don't show spurts of kind of being weak at any point, and they come away with the victory over a tough Seattle opponent, 34-26. And honestly, at times, New England was way, way, way ahead, and Seattle really just clawed themselves way back
Yep.
into this matchup.
Second half.
But yeah, I mean, 34-26 victory for the Free Jacks was a big one.
Yeah, I mean, look, Seattle had their injuries, but it's no excuse because at the end of the day, you look at that New England Free Jack side and you look at their back row, no Slade McDowell, right?
Mm-hmm.
No Mitch Jacobson. You look at their centers, no Ben Lesage, no LaRue Milan.
Yeah.
And you know, at the end of the day, New England Free Jacks didn't put out the strongest side that they could have put out, and they were still dominating most of that game and dominating especially the first kind of 50 60 minutes. So it just shows how strong their depth is, but also just how strong their team can be at full strength. But I gotta give kudos. I think Bodine Waka finally, really showed up this week.
Yeah.
And showed up big and showed exactly what everybody who maybe just started watching the MR this year missed when they didn't watch last season from Bodine Waka.
Yep.
It was electric.
And before we get into kind of the fantasy performances, let's get the controversy out of the way here, Matty, because I know you were tweeting stuff out about it. Brian Ray was tweeting out about it, and if you didn't catch the matchup, very first try.
There's a couple things, but yeah, let's start with this one.
Yeah, very first try of the match, called try on the field. Apparently they're running TMO. They allow the New England Free Jacks to take a conversion kick. And even after all that, they're lining up for the kickoff. They then call the try back from the TMO and wipe out the points and go all the way back to what? A knock on that happened in a line out several phases before.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll take it right on the shins that I guess they changed the TMO.
Take it on the shins.
I'll take it on the shins. The chins? The shins?
Take it on the chin, buddy.
I'll take it on the shins too. The shins hurt just as much as the chin, Vandy.
But the chin knocks you out, buddy.
Shins hurt. I don't want to get knocked out yet, but look, I'll take it on the shins and the chin that I guess they changed the TMO protocol and you are allowed to call back tries now before the conversion is taken. But regardless, it was just the fashion that it was done. Nobody saw it. There was no clear video evidence of like, look, this is what happened.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they showed it after the fact, but then you look at some of the other protocols of, the knock-on infringement has to be within 2 phases of the try being scored. So that didn't happen. It was at least 3 or 4 phases that was between the knock-on at the lineout and the actual try being scored. So to me, I think this kind of just started the conversation, the glaring idea of like the TMO usage has been inconsistent. The TMO usage has been, not, I don't think there hasn't been any formality around it. It's been a little bit messy in terms of how the refs have been using it. And I think a lot of the time, in order to help the new people watching understand what exactly they're looking at and what exactly and why they're looking at it, there needs to be formality. There needs to be consistency to it and why and what they're looking for so that everybody new watching can understand and help them understand the rules.
Yeah, and it makes it kind of sloppy too when you have a pretty clear rule and then you just go against it without really any definition of the rule, right?
Exactly. Or like, just the difference between people. It's important that new fans understand why something wasn't allowed. Why
Because this is
something
a big
yeah.
argument kind of all across sports, and we're starting to really look at it, and it's the review process, right? And it's been a new thing in kind of hockey and football and MLR and all these things, and it takes kind of the human element out, which is great, but it's also bad too, because there's something to be said about that human element, that yeah, it happened a little bit ago, but it didn't lead to the try. Did it lead to and the fact that if you take it back, kind of like an offside in hockey that was so close that did it really do anything?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing there is just like, once you become so reliant on it, refs never will make a
Exactly.
decision on their own,
Yep.
right? You still want to continue to have that
Yep.
look. The guy on you're the ref on the field, you're managing
Yep.
the game, you are the decision maker, regardless of whether you go up to TMO or not. And look, you have to stick with your decision.
And that's how the game has to be played. That's a
and make
great
decision. Yep.
great point. The ref has to play the game like the TMO's not there.
Mm.
Yep.
It's a great tool to use, but it shouldn't be something you rely on. Don't use it as a crutch. Use it as a tool.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Exactly.
Very, very well put.
But yeah, I mean, Ryan, you brought up Brian Ray was talking about it. There are other guys. I know Stephen Lone was tweeting a little bit about it. But the other thing I wanted to bring up, Rye, was right before that try, right before that try, Seattle Seawolves admin tweets out, "No tries have been scored yet," and a minute later they tweet out, "New England Free Jacks scored," and then it got called back, and they say, "Oh, it got called back," and then New England Free Jacks scored again, and I commented, I was just like, Twitter admin curse times too, and he's like, and they just said, "Yeah, it's been a doozy."
Yeah,
and that's all
funny.
they could say.
That is funny. But yeah, I think it just highlights kind of the process that needs to move forward. Obviously, TMO, I will put into context here for the MLR first season that they put it in. But I mean, I don't think that's an excuse. If you're going to use it, don't make it confuse the game even more. TMO's there to make it more clear.
Don't muddy the drink,
and available, and we'll see whether or not improvements can be made throughout the off season. Obviously, one match and playoffs still to go here in the Major League Rugby 2023 season, but I think that is a very big learning lesson moving forward, because it did cause a little bit of uproar there in social media circles around the MLR. But all right, let's get into some fantasy performances here. We'll start off on the Seattle Seawolves side of things, and I'll open up with, Tavit Lopetti. This guy is.
Where were you when I needed you?
So athletic.
That try was silly.
Dude, it was unreal.
That was a very
beautiful,
very, very nice try. Tavit Lopetti in this one, racking up 16.5 fantasy points, 95 meters gained, 5 tackles, a try in 83 minutes played. That try was definitely worth a few extra.
That's the price of admission right there.
Yeah, no kidding. Also mentioned Dan Creel. Dan Creel looks
nice
solid, 16.9 fantasy points. He's a guy that's kind of been tapering off towards the tail end of this fantasy season, I feel like, a little bit. But nonetheless, he bounces right back here. 16.9 fantasy point performance, 87 meters gained, a try in 83 minutes played. Pretty solid guy finishing off the fantasy MLR season. And then I want to mention also the benefactor of the Seattle Seawolves set piece, Peter Malcolm. 14.7 fantasy points. Didn't even start the matchup. Obviously, got all those tries in, I believe, the second half there with the 2 tries, the 22 meters gain, and the 10 tackles for 14.7 fantasy points.
Yeah, and it's also tough to talk about Seattle Seawolves, in this season without talking about Luena Futi.
Futi. He had a game.
He just has had a season this year, and every time he started,
what was his meters that game?
Gold, so 165.
Oh my gosh, man!
20.7 fantasy points.
Wow, without a try too.
Without a try. What a beast.
5 of the last 6 weeks, he has scored over 15 fantasy points. He's gone 3 straight weeks above 17.4 fantasy points. This guy's been incredible. Obviously, he was the guy that was the only guy that has scored a hat trick of tries in 2 separate matches this season. So Foodie, Lion of Foodie.
Mono was close.
Yeah. Close. All right. Shifting over now to the New England Free Jacks side of things. Kind of a low key kind of just straightforward performance by the New England Free Jacks, at least from a fantasy perspective. No one really like busting out here, but Paulo
Yep.
Yeah.
Bellicana looks solid
Always.
in this one. He's a guy that has been pretty solid for fantasy all season long. Every single week that he's played in, he scored double-digit fantasy points, except for 2. He has gone 8 straight weeks of scoring double-digit fantasy points, all above 14.1 fantasy points. In this one, 17.6, 83 minutes played, a try, 83 meters gained, and 11 tackles. Pretty crazy stuff by him. And then we go into Sam Fishley. I mean, Sam Fishley was solid in this one.
Looked really good.
He's started or has been off the past couple weeks here. Hasn't scored double-digit fantasy points, hasn't scored a try all season, but in this one, 14 and a half fantasy points, 79 minutes played, a try in 84 meters.
I mean, yeah, this is a guy that they're bringing off the bench. This is the guy that they don't even have in their 23 sometimes, and that's the depth of the New England Free Jacks.
Yeah, absolutely. And then last guy I want to bring up is a friend of the show, Andrew Quattrin. I mean, he's been looking pretty good. Back-to-back starts for the New England Free Jacks. And this one scores a try, 11.3 fantasy points. He scored 4 tries in the last 5 games with the New England Free Jacks. 11.3 fantasy points, like I said, 48 meters gained in 61 minutes played with that try. Pretty good stuff by Q.
I want to say Wayne Vanderbank had a really good game too. Almost 100 meters, 14 tackles.
Yeah, pretty solid stuff. He racked
For
up
your
a
center,
total of 14 and a half fantasy points in that one, and that's again some of the stuff that we've been mentioning this season with the addition of having those tackles. You're able to have these consistent and pretty solid fantasy point performance, even without scoring tries. But hey, how's it feel? Last round breakdown of the fantasy season.
We don't even need to talk about waiver wires. Don't even need to, look forward to this week of being stressful and, figuring out what players we're going to start.
But I haven't stressed in weeks, man. It's been sad.
It's been sad, Vandy says. All right. Well, as we wrap up this show here, I want to give a quick little update on, and this is a teaser to what we're going to have all off season long. Because again, the Fantasy Ruckers show doesn't stop, even though the fantasy off season begins. We're going to be breaking down some of the top players from this season. Going to get into kind of reflections on how we thought this brand new season went with all the new additions. We're going to have interviews on. We're going to bring on hopefully Alistair Kirsch-Poole at some point to talk about the website. Bring on some of our league members. And bring on obviously players as well, because that's what we love during the off season, is bringing on some of these players that we are obviously tracking and get to talk to them about their thoughts on fantasy and how they perform. But before we get into all that, talked a little bit about the reflection of the season, but I'm going to give you guys, as it's fresh in your minds as the season has just finished, a little bit of a moment here to kind of talk about this season, how it was for you boys, because obviously for those of you who haven't been following along all year or weren't following on last year, huge changes heading into this season. Obviously the addition of our website was the biggest thing this season, allowing the fantasy managers in our league to make those decisions, make the pickups on their own, do all those things. Again, big shout out to Alistair Kirsch-Poole, who was the mega mind behind this, that was able to put all this all together, which we can't thank enough for that. But having the addition of that, and then addition of all those stats that we had, obviously last season heavily try based, but this season got tackles, got breakdown, had tackles, had breakdown steals, we got meters gained. It was just really changed the framework. So with all those additions, just kind of initial kind of thoughts here, guys, about how this 2023 fantasy season went for you guys.
Well, this year actually felt, not that last year didn't feel like fantasy, but part of fantasy is obviously watching the game. But to really truly enjoy fantasy, you have to be kind of a data junkie. You gotta look at charts and numbers, and it's got to excite you, and that's what makes fantasy exciting, and that's really what was made obtainable by this website. It's the fact that you don't look at something as literal as tries. It could be, okay, I'm wanting a guy who plays 80 minutes and he's getting meters gained and he's getting tackles and maybe he gets a steal or two a game, and I can live off that. I no longer have to just be like, okay, who's kind of getting tries, who am I going to throw a dart at, because you can just play a guy based off of just play time alone, and that's what opens up the fantasy. That's what makes me love the game, is that data junkie in me, where it's like, numbers, like that's what makes it interesting. So I mean, just based off that, this year has just been, I don't want to say exponentially better, like to put a condescending undertone on last year, but it's just been.
I mean, I could feel
man,
it.
it's night and day. Like it truly is.
Yeah.
It's like it's like biking to work and then somebody gave you a car. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like
I mean,
they're not
that's the
comparable. They're not.
that's the thing. For me, last year was just it was the first itty bitty taste. You know, you got a taste of what
Exactly.
fantasy
Yep.
could be like, and as we just kind of introduce these like little like kind of um you know, juvenile kind of stats that we
Yep.
could just kind of manage. And then this year, kind of really taking it as full on as we could,
Yep.
and continuing to hope to grow it. It definitely was a huge step forward.
Yeah, man.
Matt, for you, man, how did it feel like? Obviously,
Ah,
you're gonna have bias undertones here as you're the champion under these new climate
I
and
wasn't even gonna
scenario,
bring it up.
Your Disney
It's
hat
hard.
did it for you.
Yeah, it's hard to think past it when I'm.
Now you
already
deserve
shaking
it,
my head.
buddy. It hurts me to
Hey,
say it, but you deserve it.
Hey, I appreciate you. And but look, I think this year it was a it was a I think Vandy brings up a good point with all the data and stuff. And I think kind of adding on to that, it was a year that we could finally watch a game and, look at the guys that we think played well in
Mhm.
that game and say, that guy's going to have good fantasy
Yep.
relevance. That guy is going to be a guy that I want to pick up. I can see how his game translates right into our fantasy scoring. And we saw that throughout the week. Every week, MLR would put out a top 15 or a fantasy weekly, whatever, MLR 15 that sometimes sucked, but most of the guys in there, you could understand why they were there. And all of those guys would be guys that were relevant and who we would talk about in our episodes in the following week, right?
Mhm.
So that was, I think, the best part for me, where you could watch the game and know that, hey, this guy had a good game. This guy I know is going to be have some fantasy relevance without even looking at the stats,
Yep.
which
Yeah.
I think
And you know
was
what?
great. Yeah, it added predictability as well. And like actually, like you said, Vandy, you're not just like throwing a dart at the board. You're actually making a educated guess of who is going to go off in the following week, and that's what made it like more satisfying to get it right.
And it got rid of that kind of disappointment where if you were watching the first or second game of the week and somebody got a huge try and you're like, oh, there goes that.
Yeah.
Or somebody put up 2 tries and you're like, oh, there goes my week. Now,
Yeah.
if you could have a guy get 20 points and he didn't even get a damn try, and it's completely game changing, man.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, that's all great points. I mean, for me, as from a commissioner standpoint of things, and kind of obviously not outside looking in, but not as a user of
Yep.
the fantasy league. I think for me, the big thing that made me really happy was now we've introduced kind of what you guys are saying, a strategy behind this. There are different now archetypes that we can kind of buy into, and there's different ways to approach it. And it's not just about, I'm just trying to find the guy that's going to score a try this week.
Yep.
It's about, okay, how do I build my lineup? Obviously, I'm going to need to have guys that score tries, but
Yep.
I'm also going to need to have guys that I know can consistently get me 10 to 15 points that aren't going to lose me a week. There's just a whole nother level, like a whole nother dynamic of all that, and it's fun because that's what fantasy sports is about.
Yep.
And any fantasy is that the strategy behind it and the approach to it. And when you can introduce more ways that fantasy managers kind of approach the game and think about it and be able to look at it in a different way and digest the game in their own way because of these different perspectives. That's when it gets a lot of fun. That's when fantasy MLR gets a lot of fun. The fact that we took that extra step this season is very, very, it's definitely not the top. I'm not going to sugarcoat and say, hey, this is the best and this is where it's going to be. We're going to continue to make improvements and get better.
Every
But
stat can be adjusted. I mean, we still
this-
do it in our fantasy football league 7 years later.
Exactly.
We still adjust stats. Like,
Exactly.
and I just
But
want to
even
say
from,
one more tidbit. Sorry to cut you off, Ryan. I just want to say, Ryan, thank you for all the work you put in. Oddball, you're the best, man. James Dealey, everybody that has played week in, week out, given so much time. The Discord channel is always popping off. I hop on there. Oh, you guys are up way too late. Go the hell to bed. But it's always got new stuff in there. The banter's there. Fitzy made a comment like, sorry boys, I'm all excited. Like maybe I was trash talking too much. It's like that's what this is. That's the goal of this product only gets better by situation like this. So once again, Ryan, thank you. Oddball, James Dealey, all the guys playing. Matt, congratulations, buddy. And it's just been a year, man.
I think that's a good way to kind of wrap it all up, because I think that's the way I want to kind of finish it here. Is that, yeah, can't thank the league members enough, because without the league members, this is not going anywhere. We need full participation. And Vandy, you and I, Matt, we all have been in other fantasy sports leagues where we have had guys that have quit halfway through, that have bought out, a few weeks in, and in any fantasy sport that's tough, but especially in this one where it's so. Despite the website, it is still so reliant on the participation of the league members at these early stages. The fact that essentially all 10 league members were really bought in throughout the entire thing was fantastic. So got to thank out all the league members. James Dealey's MLR Stats. Make sure you go check him out at MLR Stats, at Jam Delay on Twitter. He's been doing fantastic stuff with that. Rugby Morning, John Fitzpatrick, who we had on the show last week. Go check him himself. Sign up to his newsletter, rugbymorning.com. It's really good stuff. Great to kind of start off your day with all the latest in North America rugby happenings. I got to say, Rugby Wrap Up been fantastic. Obviously, they're creating a whole bunch of great content, MLR content, rugby content everywhere. So check them out. Bill Baker, Eagles Overseas. Fantastic. He obviously does those Eagles Overseas happy hours on Twitter with a Twitter Live. We were on that show, Matt, you and I. Great show. Go check that out as well. And then even our hardcore fans. I mean, we talk about Stephen Lowen and his Feral Hippies, John and Lads on Tour, the Dankest Anchors, Hokey, who's obviously bought into this league. And then got to give a shout out as well to MLR All Access's participation in this season as well with their Gimme the Loots team too. But yeah, starts with the league members. And then again, got to give a special shout out to Alistair Kirschpool, who with the website
What a beast.
I can't thank him enough of how much of a game changer it is. And him and I will be working closely together this offseason to get things even better. Obviously, he's the one that knows a whole lot more about these technical things than I do, and I just do my best to kind of input the fantasy side of things. But again, without him, none of this would have been possible. And I got to throw in there too, he has shaved off, or he has allowed me to live my life with a few more extra hours each week compared to the manual scrubbing through games and stats that I had to do all last season. So that on a side note alone was just super fantastic. So again, fantastic 2023 season. Make sure you stay tuned this offseason. Obviously, we're going to be watching these MLR playoffs. We're going to be talking about them. But in the meanwhile, we're going to start getting into kind of a reflection of this 2023 season. Talk about these top players. Talk about strategies. Talk about what we kind of experienced this season. And obviously, like we always do, bring on players onto the show, interview them, talk about fantasy rugby, bring on different guests. We're going to have a lot of fun this offseason breaking this all down. But again, we're just 1 week off of it or removed from it. And I already want the 2024 fantasy season to begin, which is crazy.
Yeah, I want another swing at the ball, man.
Hey, don't we all, go, buddy? But
all right,
it'll come.
Matt, I'm gonna give you, since you are the champion, I'm gonna give you the final say here on this episode number 70. A word to either the league members, to the community members out there, as you have your name now etched in the fantasy MLR history books.
All right, I've spent all year being a toxic, little, for lack of a better term, a donkey. That's what I've been. So I'm finally gonna eat some humble pie and actually go with it.
You're gonna eat the crow, eh?
Yeah, I'll actually eat some of that humble pie and finish off. Vandy, boys, you guys said it all, but it was a pleasure to go against all the boys, the part of the league. I mean, it's been an unreal year. Yeah, getting to be the champion of 1 year is great, but I can see that for so many years to come, there's just so much opportunity for so many more champions to come, or even a dynasty from the Rock and Roll squad.
Hey, attaboy.
But yeah, no, unreal year, unreal way to finish it off. Already looking forward to the next year, but hey, I got to take some time to celebrate and
go to Disney World.
Steven, yeah, go to Disney World, and Steven, you don't forget to celebrate. You're the GOAT. You are literally the toilet bowl dynasty. You are starting a dynasty over there, my friend.
Steven, GG's, buddy.
All right, well, hey. We're not going anywhere. We'll be back, break down this off season. But again, a fantastic 2023 fantasy MLR season. Congratulations to Ruck and Roll. For Matt Yee, for Devin Vandy Vanderpool, I'm Ryan Yee, and we'll be back here on the Fantasy Ruckers Show.
You've
been listening to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, covering everything rugby from the MLR and beyond. We hope you enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and be sure to tell all your friends. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, connect with us on social media at the Fantasy Ruckers. Till next time, this is the Fantasy Ruckers Show, signing off.